Evening, everybody. Good evening. Happy Sabbath, everybody. Glad to see everybody could make it tonight. Glad to see you gentlemen could make it tonight.
Good to be here.
Tonight we're going to talk about Joshua. Joshua was a loyal assistant to Moses, and we're going to go through some verses and he kind of explain that character, that personage in the Bible, and kind of shed some more light on why he was, who he was, and why he was chosen for the position he ended up getting. So, Dr. Ricks, if you'd like to start us out.
Oh, this is an interesting side note. In Hebrew, the word Joshua is the word that in Greek, becomes Jesus when we anglicize it. So that Joshua is the name that Jesus would have had in the common world in which he lived in. I realize in our language it's Jesus, not Joshua or Joshua, but I'm just letting you know that Joshua and Jesus are the same. I just thought that's an interesting sideline, and we're going to get to the importance of that in just a minute. Okay, this is something called Random Thoughts as We Age. So this is an elderly couple, and they're talking about aging, and they say things like, the biggest lie I tell myself is, I don't need to write that down, I'll remember it. Now, I want to tell a sub-joke based on that, and then we're going to come back to the random thoughts of the elderly. There was a couple that was late 80s, early 90s, and the doctor gave him a checkup. He said, well, you're doing reasonably well, but your memory is slipping. You need to make notes to yourself and write things down. So while they're watching TV that evening, the old man gets up out of the chair and heads for the kitchen. His wife says, well, why don't you bring me a bowl of ice cream? He says, sure. And then she said, don't you think you should write that down? No, I can remember a bowl of ice cream. She says, well, I want nuts on it. Write that down. I can remember a bowl of ice cream and nuts. He says, I want a bowl of nuts, strawberries, and whipped cream. You need to write all that down. I don't need to write it down. I can remember ice cream, nuts, strawberries, whipped cream. I can remember that. So I don't need to write it down. He goes off into the kitchen. 20 minutes later, he comes back with bacon and eggs. And his wife looks at him and she says, where's my toast?
Oh, all the younger people at work, when they forget stuff, they forget stuff or they don't write it down. I tell them, you know what? It's only going to get worse. I knew it.
His thing is, gotta complain.
Why am I here? What am I here for?
Yes.
Why do you go in the kitchen? What am I here for? A few more random thoughts as we end. The guy says, I don't need anger management. I need people to stop making me mad. My people are just fine. My kids text me PLZ for please. To save letters. I text back NO instead of yes to save letters. Why do I have to press 1 for English when you're going to transfer me to somebody I cannot understand anyway? And the final one, chocolate comes from cocoa, which is a tree. That makes it a plant, which means chocolate is healthy salad. That's nice thinking, don't you think? And I don't have gray hair. I have wisdom highlights. My wife's applauding. Okay, now we should get serious and get to Joshua. I thought maybe the first area to look at Joshua was all the things he did many years serving Moses before he led the children of Israel into the promised land. Joshua was a loyal servant to Moses. I'm going to just read this one little set of scriptures here. This is number 14:6, but Through many, many years, he was a loyal servant waiting at the base of the mountain to help Moses. And if you ever get to see the movie, the original Ten Commandment movie, made in 1957 with Charlton Heston, I think they give you a good portrayal of Joshua, a pretty good one. Anyway, Numbers 14:6. The 10 spies had gone into the promised land, and they came back with a report. We now think, based on the evidence available, that 10 of the spies were working with a conspiratorial group. I know this sounds crazy, that wanted to kick Moses and Aaron out of the leadership. They wanted to pull away from God and God's laws, go back to paganism and to pagan Egypt. And these guys were part of a conspiracy. So the 10 bad ones came back, bad spies that got struck dead shortly after that. And they said the promised land wasn't all that good. And besides that, it was full of dangerous Canaanites that were bigger and stronger, walled cities, and even giants. And we're going to be mincemeat in front of them to scare the people into wanting to go back to Egypt. But Joshua supported Moses all the way, and Caleb. Verse 6, Numbers 15. But Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jeshunah, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. He spoke to all the congregation, I assume on a platform, 4,000 children of Israel, saying, land we passed through to spy out is an he goes on to explain that if God delights in them, God
Yeah, I think you froze up, Dr. Ricks.
Go ahead, Ken.
No, you froze up. We couldn't hear you. So if you want to back up for a minute, or reread that verse.
Oh, Numbers 14:6, you mean? 7?
Yeah.
Did I leave something out?
No, just for the last 30 seconds, we didn't hear what you were saying.
Oh, basically he said that they spoke to all the congregation of the children, and this is Joshua, the land, verse 7, we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land, and probably elaborated on the great forest and great ranges for cows, and the great farmland, and the fertile Jordan Valley, and all the things that the Middle East was famous for then as a land of milk and honey. And he also said, if God is with us, who can be against us? We can win over these guys. And there really weren't all that many giants. The bad spies elaborated, exaggerate and elaborate to scare them, where Joshua was being supportive of Moses and God.
Interesting note. Joshua means Yahweh is Savior. And so, it's interesting he was named that, as well as Christ was Yeshua, which is interpreted as Jesus in the New Testament, means that God is the Savior. Just an interesting thing there, that how they both represented saving us.
Both had that same name, which is, in Hebrew it's Yeshua, but in Greek it's, well, the anglicized version of the Greek is Jesus. I realize in Spanish it's Jesus and some other language, but you get the general idea. It's Jesus in English. But they both had the same name, and that's interesting. The one thing that I thought we should mention is, I believe a good leader starts off by being a good servant of the guy that he is supporting. In other words, to be a good leader, you have to first be a good follower and a good assistant and support the leadership and the organization that you're with. A good supporter of your boss. It's a good way to learn how to be a good leader.
I've got two stories. I'll make them real quick. One is, I know a farmer in the area, and all of his kids have to work on the farm and doing every job, from picking the stuff to planting it to every piece of it, because he feels that the only way that they can ever rise to the position of being a leader is that they have to be the servant first. A friend of mine is when he graduated from the police academy, there was a lawyer that went to the academy with them, and he had been hired to write Florida law. And he said, "How can I write Florida law when I've never for this particular thing when I've never done it?" So he went through the academy, and I believe actually worked in the prison system because he specifically was writing prison rules. And worked in that system for a while so that he could understand what they were dealing with so that he could write fair and logical and intelligent rules for the system. Those are good signs of a leader.
By the way, it always bothers me when a politician will name, and I know there may be justifiable reasons for it occasionally, but they'll name somebody Secretary of Defense who knows nothing about the military. And this could be also true of some other big secretarial positions in the government. It just seems odd. I know some of it's political payoffs and all that sort of thing, but do you really want someone leading something who doesn't really understand it? I'm giving you all my opinion, of course. Someone like McNamara, who's in charge of the military during the years in Vietnam when the policies were stupid, but he ran it like you run a factory because he was a big GM executive. But can you see that that's not what you need in a Secretary of Defense? You need somebody who has served first to be the leader.
Right.
Well, I tell people sometimes with my business, read a book about skydiving and then jump out of an airplane and show me how to do it. Read a book about swimming and jump off the deep end and show me how to do it. If you've never been in the water, you can read the book, you can have an idea, you can listen to people, but until you get in the water, it changes everything. And you're going to go, both of those cases, you're going straight to the bottom.
Yeah. And what were you saying, Ken, about you need to be a good worker, employee to become a good leader?
No, I was just saying that when I would look for people to be, let's say, my assistant, I would always look for people who would take care of, they would, whatever needed done, they would take care of it. They would make sure that, if there was product needs moved around or paperwork needs done, they would jump in and take care of it. They wouldn't wait. They wouldn't wait for you to, get behind or whatever. If it needed done, they'd just jump on it and take care of it. They wouldn't wait to be told or wait to be, given the job to do it. They just would make sure it was done. And those people that I could see do that on the, in the rest of the operation, they're the ones that I would want to make my assistant. But if they seen something needed done, they just did it. And they had. I told. I didn't look for people who, because the job entailed lots of math and different things that I could teach them. I looked for people who could do, who had good people skills and good servant skills, so to speak. If they had the skills to serve and the skills to deal with people, anything else in the job, I could teach them. Mechanical stuff, I could teach them. I could teach them how to do the math and do the computer work. None of that stuff bothered me, but there's some basic skills they had to have, and it had to be ingrained in them. That I can't teach, so that they needed to bring with them.
So before you promoted somebody, you wanted to see that servant skill.
Right. I wanted to be able to not spend all my time trying to turn them into that, because that takes a long time to teach someone how to have that kind of skill. You're basically changing their heart or changing their outlook on work, and that's hard to do. But teaching them some math or some computer skills is easy. That's mechanical stuff you can teach them. But the stuff that's ingrained in them, they have to bring that with them. It takes a lot longer to train that, and you can, but it takes a lot longer.
My son, when he was a teenager, he said, "Dad, teach me how to pay my bills and how to, make money and take care of all these things." And I said, "I'll do that first thing in the morning." When the sun came up, I started a lawnmower right underneath his bedroom window. And he came walking outside and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm teaching you. Get up. Get off your butt and get to work." You know, he was not happy with me.
You know, one thing that we can speculate is that as a servant leader to Moses, Joshua learned and displayed that servant leadership skills. And, you know, Moses asked for a good person to replace him. And God was preparing Joshua for many years to do that. And I was thinking, if we learn to be good servants, loyal to the people we serve, and, you know, just be loyal, good servants, we're preparing to become servant leaders in the world tomorrow. And that is really important to God, I think.
Yeah, you know,
Yep.
people ask me, you know, I had somebody a couple years ago at the feast, and they said, "How do we know who the ministers are? You know, where do they park, and where's their seating?" And I said, "Well, the ministers park with the whatever available space that works for them and their wife and kids, or however that fits, and they sit with what's available. You know, around here, you come in, you find a seat. If you're lucky, you know, get early and you can get a better seat." And they were really taken back because the groups that they'd been attending, the ministers all had assigned parking and assigned seats, and everybody knew who they were because they had a special whatever. And I said, "Well, we're not like that. We're not like that. They're your brothers, and they're your family. If you don't look at it that way, then you're not understanding." And I think, you know, when you consider the term minister, it means a servant. We are supposed to be serving. You know, nobody should be carrying your briefcase into services for you. You know, that's what your wife and eldest kids do.
It's going to be a long night over there today.
Your briefcase and stuff. Yeah. But, you know, it would be nice if, you know, the person could say, "You know, I went in the congregation, a lot of people were around, but you could tell who were the real servant leaders. You could just see it. That's the way it should be." And, you know, you tell people when they get ordained, "I'm not necessarily doing you a favor, but you're going to have to work even harder now." But that's how it should be. And I was thinking, Timothy was also a protege of Paul, just like Joshua was a protege of Moses. And I want to look at Philippians 2, because I think there's a point to be made here. And this is Paul, because he sent them to Timothy to Corinth, the troubled churches, to help out. Here's what Paul says about Timothy. Philippians 2:19. "But I trust in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you shortly, that I also may be encouraged when I know your state. For I have no one like-minded who will sincerely care for your state. For all seek their own, not the things which are Christ Jesus." And then he goes on to talk about Timothy and related areas. He knows that Timothy will take care of the people. He will serve. Isn't that a wonderful tribute to Timothy? Mm-hmm. You wonder why he was Paul's successor and all those New Testament churches he built all along Asia and Europe. Is because of people like Timothy helped him and took over when we believe he was martyred shortly before the temple was destroyed. He was martyred behind Caesar's throne. He even wrote in one of his letters he was ready to depart. He was ready to sacrifice himself. They say that, probably politics, I'm sure, that Caesar had his head chopped off when he was an old man behind Caesar's throne. But the point is, he had someone like Timothy to take over and just keep things going because he was a real servant leader. And that's Philippians 2:19 and 20, in case anyone wants to follow those scriptures.
Well, you know, something I saw a while back was about the kids in, I think it's Japan, but another country. After school, they don't have janitors. After school, the kids clean the floors, they clean their classroom, they're taught to work and a work ethic. And I think that as children in America, as we were growing up, I think a lot of us our age and older were taught that ethic, but people are not necessarily being taught that anymore. So that's something that's kind of being bred out of our DNA, which is it's going to be a failure for the country.
By the way, one of the things in our, a lot of econ statistics, and our government lies about some of the statistics. We can talk about that later. But one that's amazing is that productivity per worker is going down, and it's not because there's less technology. That's usually the reason, or less automation. That does not seem to be the case. For some reason, which is statistically unexplained, productivity in America as a whole is going down.
Socialism.
Is it socialism?
Yeah.
It has that effect on people. Some people, not all, of course.
That's why Bernie sounds so good to these people now.
And maybe that's a hard thing to measure, too, as to why it's going down. But I do believe that he was a good assistant to Moses, and that prepared Joshua to be the leader. The second topic I want to cover is something that is, let's say, open to discussion. Why was Joshua permitted to lead the people into the land of Canaan instead of Moses? Now, here's one real possibility. God wanted Moses' legacy to be primarily that of lawgiver and deliverer, since he delivered from Egypt and was lawgiver. If he had continued in control of Israel for another 20 years, his legacy would have been also that of a bloody conqueror. And I think God wanted that role for Joshua. Maybe the name is partly part of that too. But in a sense, if Moses had stepped into the promised land, what he would have, actually, he saw it from the top of Mount Nebo, so he saw the beauty of it, he got to see it, panoramic vision. But if he had actually walked across the Jordan there, the first thing he would have saw was the Battle of Jericho, which was a bloody massacre. In other words, Joshua's role was to apply the curse God put on those 7 perverted, evil tribes of Canaan. But I don't think that's the legacy God wanted for Moses. Now, I know that the details of Moses' fall was when he was supposed to speak to the rock to bring water, and he struck the rock because the Israelites I'll put it like this, the Israelites got to Moses. Moses was so irritated by them, that very day they plotted against Moses. The same group that always keeps plotting against him. And they were complaining about being in the wilderness, which, by the way, at that point it was their own fault. If they'd gone into the promised land like they were supposed to, they wouldn't have been there. But somehow they forget what was their fault, and they're blaming it on Moses and Aaron against them.
How would you like to be?
Not Moses' goat.
What was that, Don?
I said, I feel sorry for Pastor Moses. How would you like to be the pastor of a congregation of 6 million unconverted hardheads? You wonder why he got upset, and
Yeah, really.
only by God's leading him did he not fly off the handle more. He even asked God not to kill them, because of their rebellion. But finally he did. He had it up to his skull. This one part here. But God took him to the mountain and took him very quietly, and then took his body so they wouldn't make an idol of it. If, like Dr. Rick says, if he's going into the promised land, if he went on into Canaan and lived another 30 years and established the kingdoms, consolidated them into the kingdom of Israel and so on, and then died, oh boy, he'd have a hard time not making an idol out of him. There's a reason that God took him when he did. And I always looked at it as, okay, God gives some people certain commissions to do, certain jobs. And that's exactly what happened. He commissioned Moses to do what? To write down the law and to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt to a certain point. Then he commissioned Joshua to take over. And then he commissioned the judges and David, and right on down the line, each one had a commission and a job to do until God's, their job was done, and he took them, plain and simple. Looking today, in our day to day, it's come down to our day to day, the very same thing.
Well, I also think that God is merciful, and Moses had dealt with those people 2/3 of his life.
Mm-hmm.
How much more could he? I guess through God all things are possible, but maybe it was time that Moses had a rest. He got to see the promised land. He believed that Joshua would lead them in and perhaps build a great nation that would be a magnificent nation dedicated to God forever. The original generation of people had all died out, and this was their descendants, still the blood of Abraham. Mm-hmm. And Moses got to rest and know and feel in his mind, this is in God's hands, and it's going to work out. I said a while back, Moses got to look at the promised land. We get to be born and watch it fail in our world today, and our only hope is looking towards Jesus Christ, because this country has gone very astray.
A lot of people look at what happened to Moses at Meribah when he struck the rock, and he said, "You rebels! I got to bring water out of this rock." It's obvious the Israelites got on Moses' nerves, and they also said they've been plotting and stoning him and plotting against him the very same day. So it's understandable. And people think, well, God is too harsh to Moses. Obviously, Moses made a mistake. I'm not saying he didn't, but I think actually, in many respects, it was a blessing to Moses. Let's look at it from another point of view. Moses was healthy when he went up the mountain, and he got to see the promised land, but actually he walked down the other side, and then he just went to sleep, and which is a great way to go. I mean, you're healthy, then you go to sleep, and then you pass into God's kingdom. What a way to go. And in the next moment of Moses' consciousness, he'll be in the real promised land. I mean, Canaan was nice for what it was, but it wasn't a glorious promised land in the spiritual sense. It was just a place to fight over valleys and, you know what I mean, and farmland. But the real promised land, being in God's kingdom and God's family, is going to be fabulous for Moses. So he did get to go to the real promised land that really counts the most. And I believe God loved Moses, even though he made a mistake. By the way, interesting thing about the Bible, at least those characters that get a lot of ink, a lot of coverage, God tells you their mistakes as well as their good things, including Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, David. We could rattle off the numbers. The ones that got a lot of, where God put a lot of emphasis on their lives, you see that they were not all perfect. But in a way, isn't that encouraging in a way to us flawed human beings?
It's very encouraging, because it tells us that these men that were great and that were loved, that accomplished so much, were still human beings. They still had a headache sometimes, still bumped their toe in the middle of the night or whatever. And it tells you that they were human beings, and that we have the same potential if we just get it together. That we really have the same potential. And the incredible potential that God has given us, and the promises that He made to Abraham that we get to partake in, we can't possibly understand them. When you're talking about that, really wasn't the promised land that we really hoped for. When Joshua led the children into the promised land, the lion was not laying down with the lamb. That's still to come for everybody.
Yeah, it was bloody warfare and a lot of mess that went on. The next section was, Joshua, when he first entered the promised land and they conquered Jericho. I wish I had those songs from years ago, the Negro spirituals about Joshua at the Battle of Jericho, and then one or two others where they had these great quartets. Those songs just don't seem to exist anymore. Great music. But getting back to Jericho, not the music so much, but the city, what Joshua, following God's orders, of course, he had them, the Ark of the Covenant, lead the way, and with priests with trumpets. And you know, the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat represents God's throne. So it's as if to say God himself, whether he was in the ark or not, but symbolically, God himself was leading the Israelites into the promised land. They went around Jericho silently, told them not to make a sound, except for a few trumpet blasts on the shofar by the priest, 6 days. And then they go back to camp. On the 7th day, they went around 7 times. And that's exactly what happens in the book of Revelation, where you have the 7 trumps, and then the 7 last trumps, and at the very last trump, Christ comes back. And the very last trump, Joshua had everybody, you know, hundreds of thousands, surrounding the city of Jericho. And then all of the priests blasted those trumpets, and then everyone shouted. Otherwise, they're totally silent. Can you imagine how that psychologically terrorized the people on the walls in Jericho? They're quiet. They think, what kind of psychological warfare is this? They're not attacking. They're not doing it. They're just walking around, just blowing the trumpet now and then and being quiet. And there's a Veggie Tale. It's one of the cuter Veggie Tale songs. We showed our grandkids. And the soldiers on the wall were peas. The peas are the bad guys with the big helmets. And they were laughing at the Israelites. You're walking around the wall being quiet is not going to make our wall come down. We got the wall, and you don't, nothing you can do about it. And all this walking around is wasting your time. You know, it's cute. But when they shout it, it's just like the return of Jesus Christ. It's like Joshua was physically doing what Christ would do. I'm going to read 1 Thessalonians 4, 16 and 17. You'll see the parallel, but as I said, the whole book of Revelation gets to that at chapter 19. But 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16. Verse 16 reads, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, just like Joshua told, what was it, 500,000, 600,000 Israelite soldiers to shout. Can you imagine what that sounded like? It must have been earth-shaking. One great shout, and those shofars that blow that piercing sound, the last trump, with a great shout, and the voice of the archangel and the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first, so we'll be part of that in the end time as well. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds, not heaven, to meet the Lord in the air, not heaven, and we shall always be with the Lord. And of course, in Revelation, that last trump, Christ comes back and he smashes Babylon the Great and all the other worldly armies that there at Armageddon and crushes the world, just like Joshua crushed at least the gatekeeper to Canaan, Jericho. The walls fell down. And the importance of the walls falling down, you might not realize that that city had great high walls. To siege a city with high walls took a lot of troops. It was hard to do, and sometimes you couldn't do it. For instance, the classic historical example is Hannibal defeated with his elephants and his big army and being a good general. He defeated the Russian armies, marched through Spain from North Africa down the Italian peninsula, surrounded Rome, and the Romans couldn't defeat him, but he could not breach the walls of Rome. And ultimately, you know, led to his defeat. Another long story, but the walls of Rome were such that a superior army could not get in. So when that wall collapsed, all those soldiers probably on the wall died, and I'm sure Jericho was easy pickings after that. But it was Joshua who kind of was a model of Jesus Christ in that great victory.
And they probably placed an awful lot of their military on the walls. Those walls were wide. You could move. I believe it could take chariots around. So those walls were very thick, very high walls. And so I could see placing a lot of your military on that wall so they could shoot at a distance before the people could get close to you, or to try to breach the wall, so they could shoot at a distance and show their spears and their arrows or catapults or whatever it was at a distance. But when the wall comes out from under you, it changes things, and it'll probably a high percentage of that military was crushed immediately right there. I'm sure it was, as they say, of biblical proportions.
Yes. The wall fell outwards, too, made it even harder. The whole city was exposed. The Israelites just ran in there, and that was the end of Jericho, the great city. Also, when they crossed the Jordan River, the priest, on a pole carried the Ark of the Covenant. As soon as they got to the Jordan River, the river ran backwards. Just like the Red Sea, they crossed a raging river with, that would include women, children, and their flocks, which certainly couldn't have swam that river. They crossed Jordan, led by God. And someday God is going to crush the evil empires of this world and lock the devil up and give us peace and happiness.
Peace that mankind's never seen.
And even in Joshua's time, after it took a while, because God wanted to be done little by little, but after he dispossessed and destroyed the 7 great nations of Canaan, Israel had peace and prosperity for a number of years, until Joshua died and all the leaders who were with him passed away. Then, of course, the story changes, as you all know. The younger generation forgot God, and bad things happened. That's another story.
It's a vicious cycle. When you look at the history of our country, people don't know where we came from anymore.
And historians are doing it intentionally. University of Texas no longer teaches Western civilization, and schools are getting rid of positive courses. Like one man said, if you look at American history, the one thing you can say, America, from 1776 on, was getting freer. Everybody, Europeans and Africans were getting freer and more prosperous as each new historical barrier was crossed and improved. Now, obviously, you don't start off perfect. You start off where the world is, but America got better and better and better. And they don't teach history that way. They teach history, America's bad, bad, bad. It's like the opposite of the truth.
When you consider the disease that we've cured, and that we feed so many people, and we've helped so many nations become better and live a better life just through our science and our medicine and teaching people how to feed themselves and what to grow and how to plant their fields, in which a lot of these nations, they go out and they just kill the female animals, and then they don't have any reproducing meat after that. So teaching them that you kill these at this time and those at that time, and the older animals, let the younger animals reproduce. A lot of nations did not have some of those basics, and they did not have the food they needed. And we went to those nations and taught these people how to ranch, how to farm, and cleanliness things. You pass disease on when you don't clean yourself. And so much that this country has done to better the world. But Satan doesn't want that. He wants to do the exact opposite. And as we destroy the United States, those things will go away as well.
They will miss us when we're gone. And in fact, the Middle East, people all over the world are starting to miss our influence now, I believe.
Now look at the Middle East. We pulled out the Middle East, or for the most part pulled out in a few spots. And it has gone to chaos, and ISIS.
Russia's starting to fill the gap. That's a good one to take over for us, Russia.
They're so warm and loving. That's the history of Russia, isn't it?
Yeah.
People really don't.
60 million. How many people did they kill of their own people? 60 million was
about
it?
1 million. Stalin killed 20 million of his own people, and they got it documented. It is well documented stuff.
Mm. Yeah, I watched that last night.
How many was it?
20 million for Stalin.
20. Okay, 20. I know.
Lenin did some before that too.
Mao Zedong got 20 million. Lady Mao is accredited with ordering the death of over 1 million people. Pol Pot ordered the execution of 1 million people. So when we pulled out of Vietnam, a perfect example, the left might need to hear this, a perfect example, when we pulled out of Vietnam, Pol Pot ordered the execution of 1 million people, like immediately.
Like 20% of his population. That was at 25%. Think about how horrible that is.
It's interesting, too, the name Ho Chi Minh means bringer of light. Something I learned in the last year.
And that's the devil's name, one of the devil's names.
Yes, yeah, he was proud of it.
By the way, the American media, which was all for the communists winning the war in Vietnam and undermined us, as I wrote up in that article that you might have saw in the magazine, the other issue, they've said very little after, the press was kicked out and over 4 million people died in Indochina in the years following the West, American and Western allies leaving. But here's something that I think a lot of people need to realize. Most of the breakthroughs in business, including air conditioning, television, the automobile for the
Did we lose him?
agriculture and agribusiness, came out of the United States of America. Most people don't know that.
It's sad because the rest of the world does. It's our kids that don't know it.
Yeah, they're told America's bad.
We're doing everything we can to erase all the good things in the history that we have, that this country has done for the world, and they're doing everything they can to erase that from the memory of our children. They're not teaching it. It's not in history books like you guys were saying. If you eliminate that, you can replace it with whatever you want.
Probably 17 or 18 years ago, a local talk show in the area was interviewing Jane Fonda, and one of the guys on the program is a very traditional family value guy, and he said to her, she asked, because it's Jack and Ted, and so she said, Ted, do you have anything you want to ask me? He says, I don't. And she said, oh, I'm sure if you listen to the interview for a few minutes, you'll come up with something. He says, no, you don't understand. I have nothing to say to you that I can say on the air. And I thought, wow, he really laid that out.
Yes. She basically should have been tried as a traitor. I know Hollywood was for, and everybody, I realized she was young and innocent and a political pawn for propaganda by America's enemies, and she was probably doing. But I still think for other movie stars not to do that in the future, she needs to be tried for treason and spend a few years in jail. But I guess that's all water under the bridge now. The liberals pretty much have things going their way in that regard. But I just mentioned that because Joshua was a great leader, and the men who worked under him were good leaders. When all that generation died out, they forgot their past. And one of the things that Joshua did, I'm going to Joshua 10, and this is something that we Christians might want to think about. Joshua 10:25. And Joshua said to them, here's some kings that were captured in battle. Do not be afraid. Do not be dismayed. Be strong. Be of good courage. Basically he said, be strong, be bold, be courageous. That's what the message that Joshua had. You realize that's a Christian message. That's what God wants us to do. If you read Revelation 21:8, you'll see that cowards are listed with some of the worst sinners in God's estimation. God does not like cowards. He wants you to have faith in God, be courageous, bold, and brave, and wise. Now, there are times it's best to be wise and don't say the wrong thing, get yourself in trouble. But when you need to be bold and brave, you need to. And I just want us to discuss that. Luke 12, especially verse 8 and 9, and verse 4 says, don't fear men, but fear God. And it says, Christ says in Luke 12:8-9, that if you are ashamed of Jesus Christ before the worldly people, God will be ashamed of us. I named it. If we're ashamed of Christ, groups you can be around. You're a Bible-thumping, a Bible-believing Christian? You know, in academia, that's the attitude they take. And I think a lot of Christians are ashamed to admit it.
Yeah, nowadays it's kind of like if you speak up and say you believe in God, you're the new heretic. You're the new evil person. You know, everything's backwards. You know, it used to be calling somebody godless was acceptable. I mean, it was a really insulting thing, a horrible thing. Now, if you believe in God, that's considered like you're a fool.
Right. People that believe in God are portrayed as being the ones taking away everybody else's fun, or looking down at what they do, you know, their sin, and they don't like that. So they just want you know, anybody who actually believes in Christ to go away. They just don't want to have to deal with it.
Yeah, I was in my school years ago, and the guy said, "You don't go to church," and the other guy goes, "No, I don't want to hang around hypocrites." And he says, "Oh, we have room for a lot more at our place."
Mm-hmm.
And, you know,
I've got a message tomorrow that it's called "A Few Good Men and Women," and I just wanted to pass on a couple of things, if right quick, if I could. It says that real leaders know that some things are more important than life itself. Heroes, martyrs, and soldiers give their lives for causes they deem more valuable than themselves. And then at the very end, I'll be ending about with some of this. I say the lowest level of knowledge is assumption. Above that is knowledge, then understanding, then wisdom, which is applied knowledge, then skill, and finally practice. I'm talking about Daniel. Daniel, not Joshua, but Daniel studied and practiced his faith in God. He caught the attention of kings who looked up to him not because he was a great orator, a political success, or a palm-pressing man-pleaser, but because of his lifestyle. He was not, and you could say this about Joshua, of course, he was not a leader made by man, but a leader made by God. And leaders are men and women who act in a moment of time on a cause that is far greater than themselves, that is morally correct and godly wise. And that certainly was Joshua. That certainly is Jesus Christ, our Redeemer and soon coming King. And as was pointed out by David earlier, Joshua and Jesus have the same Hebrew root of Yasha. So one last thing I'll leave my part is the measure of a man is not how many servants he has, it's how many people he serves. That's the definition of a man and a leader. It's not how many servants he has, but how many people he serves. And I think Joshua certainly fit that bill by serving all the people of God after Moses.
That's a very good point.
Good point.
Thank you.
yeah, when I was a kid, my dad asked me, "Are brave men afraid?" And I said, "No, they're brave. They have no fear." And he said, "Wrong. There are guys that are as scared as anybody, maybe even more afraid than the others, but they act appropriately under any circumstances. Things are blowing up, they're getting shot at, and they do the right thing in spite of their fear." And if we have the true fear of God, then we have no fear of the men around us. Only God can take your true life. They can take your body, your physical life, but God can take your salvation. Don't sell your salvation for a bowl of soup, I guess, is the moral of that.
Yeah, good point.
And when people in this world criticize you for believing in the Bible, remember God is proud of you for standing up for the real Christ. It's like Ben Carson was criticized because you don't believe in evolution? You believe in creation or intelligent design? Because he went on to explain himself. But you realize that actually, if you're being really scientific, intelligent design is much more scientific. Evolution is a lot more hopey. Like, I want to believe that this fabulous thing just happened by accident, which is pretty outrageous if you think about it. But they have the world thinking the exact opposite. But Joshua 10:13, Joshua had the faith for the moon to stand still. And I'm going to read the latter part of 10:12, and it says, and this is Joshua tribe. He prayed to God, sun, stand still over Gibeon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped. Now that is a great miracle. We know a lot now, know what a great miracle that is. It's like in the book of James where Elijah had the faith to pray that it would not rain for 3.5 years on Ahab and Jezebel. Well, Joshua had that kind of faith that the sun would stand still so they could finish off the enemies, because when dark came, they'd run and hide in their fortified cities. But they weren't able to do it because the sun stood still. And that, by the way, there's some archaeological evidence to support that really happened, by the way, because of Joshua's prayer. That is faith.
Yep. We're told if we have the faith of a mustard seed, you could move a mountain out of its place. Well, Joshua had so much faith that through his prayer, he could stop the earth from rotating. So,
and by the way, speaking of world affairs, I've got 2 articles that I got from News Now 1. One of them is, now I don't know how true it is, but the Arabs claim that several Jewish people who want to build a temple on Temple Mount prayed on the Temple Mount. I didn't even know this. Now, the Jews said it actually didn't happen, but regardless of, the Arabs don't really need the full truth to get their people to riot and burn and loot and stab. So, but I didn't know this, but Jews are not allowed to pray on the Temple Mount.
No, they're not.
On the Temple Mount. They're not allowed to pray on the Temple Mount. And our government, I got an article here, our government, which means Foreign Secretary John Kerry, is urging Israel to make pledges that they will not change the status quo of the Temple Mount. It's in Islamic hands, and they will see to it no Jew even thinks about praying anywhere near it. And somehow, doesn't that seem unfair to Israel?
Everything's unfair to Israel.
Right now, it's pretty much the world against Israel, and we're doing nothing. We're not standing in between.
Canadian Prime Minister wants that for the support of people.
I mean, these guys, they shoot rockets into Israel. Israel does anything to defend themselves, and everybody starts yelling, look what they did.
And by the way, the conservative Canadian Prime Minister was one of the best supporters Israel had, and it would appear that he is being unelected after 9+ years by a very, very liberal French Canadian. That's what the media says. So we'll see when all the votes are counted. But so they've lost their last best supporter. Even France is among nations saying we need an international peace force in Jerusalem to protect the Arabs' right on the Temple Mount. Someday, I believe the beast will take up that role and come to Jerusalem to, quote, protect the Jews and keep the Israelis from whatever they're doing. That, and of course, will eventually take over the Temple Mount and put himself in there to worship him. That's all coming. But I just thought it's interesting that Israel is not even allowed to pray, or even get close to praying, without the Arabs going crazy. And America
Did you hear that the Palestinian Authority, with their 6 Arab nations backing them, have gone to UNESCO to try and rename the Western Mall the Barak, B-U-R-A-Q, Barak Plaza, which they want to make the Western Wailing Wall part of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They want to make it. What's it say here? They want to take it away from the Jews, is what they want to do. They want to add it to Arabs' holy sites, and they're trying to get this through UNESCO.
they'll probably get it. The United Nations and most nations in the world, including America now, to a spot, are anti-Semitic.
Yep.
Maybe that might make them try to build a temple.
Yeah, could
All
be.
these things are just stacking up to add. Everything that's going on is stacking up. All the influx of the Muslims into the Europe is stacking up to get Europe to snap hard to the right in rejecting all this because of what it's doing to their countries. Everything is pushing Israel towards setting up their own temple because of all the world pushing. Everything is pushing and pushing and pushing towards the end times. Daniel and Revelation, it's just pushing as hard as it can. Ezekiel, it's just pushing in that direction.
Then it's interesting. You see it. I see it. The rest of the world doesn't see it.
No, it is. It's they're blind.
They blame Israel for using too much force to protect themselves from the Intifada stabbings.
I think it was the EU asked Israel if they'd give their Iron Dome technology to the Palestinians so it'd be more fair.
No.
Did you know you can order jewelry from Israel that's made out of Hamas rocket parts,
No, I didn't know that.
where they supposed have pieces of the rockets around? Yeah, you can order earrings and necklaces and stuff from Israel made out of it.
Huh. By the way, another subject that I just want to mention is, we're supposed to be good citizens. Theoretically, in America, the citizens are Caesar. I realize that's only theoretical, but a lot of Christians don't vote because they say we haven't got the perfect candidate. And I think in a way that's being politically naive. If you can get a candidate that agrees with you 75% of the time, is better than letting, because there are tons of people who will blindly vote for the other party, but letting the almost pure anti-God, socialism, pro-killing baby, high tax, business snuffing, job killing taxes party to win is stupid. I think we should vote for a step in the right direction, even if it's not perfect. And a lot of Christians just don't vote, but then they complain about how bad the government is. Believe me, it's going to get worse if people with a somewhat Christian approach don't gain more political power in this country.
We're very different than the other Christian churches. But my thing is the Baptist guy down the road, and I actually do a little Bible study with a Baptist guy on occasion. The Baptist guy down the road who really tries, really reads his Bible, never lie to you, has the basic right, wrong, how to treat his fellow man, tries to keep the Ten Commandments, obviously doesn't understand some of that, but really tries. I trust that guy better than somebody that doesn't believe in God at all. He's gonna try to lean towards the right way of doing things, regardless of he may not, he may keep Christmas or things that we don't do, but I think that the basic morality may be there with somebody like that.
They talk about the founding fathers and the Constitution, separation of church and state, which wasn't in there, and Jefferson later wrote about it protecting the Baptists from the government, not vice versa. But you know that over 60% of the delegates at where they wrote the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were what we would call Protestant ministers, over 60%.
Yep.
And the country was very religious based on the worldly standards, I admit. There were a lot of Sabbath keepers in America compared to other countries, but still, even Jefferson used the Bible as a textbook for the Washington, D.C. school district when he was president. And our teachers today give you the impression that our founding documents are anti-Christian, anti-God. That is just not true. They're very religious, but they didn't want a state religion because they knew how the British government misused that. But saying you don't want a state religion is not the same as not saying you don't want a religious country. It's just a total I call it a evil misinterpretation by the legal profession, which allows them to miseducate the younger generation, leading us away from God.
You know, I put that to something more physical. I don't want a United States bank, one bank for the whole country, which a lot of countries have. I like to go and say I don't like how this bank offers. I think I like what that bank offers better. I like to have my options. But that doesn't mean I'm anti-bank because I don't want one national bank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they didn't want one national church, but doesn't mean they were anti-church. They just didn't want an official United States government church, which has a lot of problems, as they learned in Europe, hard way.
And you can see both of those examples around the world with the countries that have one national bank or they have one religion for the whole country. Everything's in disarray.
Yes. One more final thing before we close. Next week we'll be talking about Halloween, which is getting bigger and uglier. We've got on this block, a nice, somewhat suburban block, we've got some gruesome displays for the little kiddies for Halloween. But apart from that, one more final thing. Social Security is in a financial bankruptcy. They can't give any COLA raises because, frankly, they wanted to reform Social Security about 10 years ago. A certain political party blocked it, and they blocked it. But the truth is, all that money we put in Social Security, all the years we worked, they just misspent it. It's not been invested. There's no locked box. It's just one more thing that's going to add to America's financial woes.
No argument for me.
I got a story about it that is, comes off the net. But now that you really want to hear about it, but that's why they can't get the COLA raises because Social Security is just not, the money is just not where it should be. And they, when it was small, didn't have that many people on it, the government didn't have to worry about it. They could just move the money around. But surely they've had many, many years to see the trend, but a certain political party just never would allow any kind of reform, and what can we say?
Well, you can't reform a Ponzi scheme. You can't reform a Ponzi scheme. It's crooked from the very first day, and it stays that way. The only way you can get rid of it is eliminate it and start with something different. And we certainly do have a national bank called the Federal Reserve, and we are in deep, deep, deep trouble. And this stock market going crazy is only because the ECB, or the European Central Bank, decided, we're not going to raise interest rates. We're going to keep them at zero and print more euros. And so there we go. Now it's our turn. Yellen did that last month. The Bank of Japan's printing yen like they need to paper Mars with it. And all this stuff fixing to collapse here, not in the very not too different future, gentlemen. We all know it. We've known these prophecies for years. We need to watch very carefully. And our brethren.
I tell people, I know a lot of people say, I'll buy gold and hide it in my basement. I'm not against people investing in gold or whatever you like. But I believe ultimately your only security is in God. I'm not saying don't store up a little food for emergencies that could happen in the winter, but still, beyond that, a little storage of food or maybe a little storage of cash for emergency, ultimately, God is our only protection. Mm-hmm. Irresponsible financial governments is what you have all over the world.
I have people come to me and they go, how much gold do you have stored? Well, one, if I was storing it, I wouldn't tell you. Two, you can't eat it. And they go, well, when you have gold, that guy that has the food will trade you. No, he won't.
No, he won't.
You can't eat it.
Nope. No, that gold thing might be okay for short term, but that's just short term. After that, yeah, food is what you're gonna want. Well, what is it? What is it? Was it the three things to keep? Uh, Toilet paper,
Water.
chocolate, and coffee.
And
You
so,
have those three things, you can trade for anything. Forget gold.
yeah, a crisis is not, you can't eat it.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want people to get scared about it because we don't know how long before God lets the devil burst the bubble, or however that works itself out. But all I'm saying, Social Security is just one more program where the government has acted financially irresponsible. I guess I'd say they're buying votes, if I would oversimplify it. And
Yeah.
at
Well,
any
they
time,
rated this. So, wait.
we need to reform it, but they would never do it because they scare the elderly. Oh, we're going to let you start. And they could have made some level of reforms years ago, but I almost think it's too late to reform it now. But
Yeah. It's when did they start letting them raid the Social Security fund and write IOUs? One president did that. I forget.
well, see, I don't think they ever really had a lockbox, but some president claimed that we could move the money around the way we wanted to. But the truth is, they've never really invested that money, saved it, to my knowledge, like they should have. When the amount going out was small, it was no big deal. But as it gets bigger and bigger and more retire, it's going to become one of the biggest drains on the budget. And I'm saying it's just one more mistake that they could have modified if they had 10, 15, 20 years ago started trying to, really put money aside. I realize, like our government can do that. Are you kidding me? Certain political party never goes for that. And anytime anybody even thought about it, they'd scream, "You're going to starve the senior citizens," because they're a big voting bloc. So nothing would happen because they scare the seniors, and they'd get more votes. Well, that's just buying votes through lies, and that's part of what's going to kill this country financially.
Yeah. Well, like you said, next week we're going to talk about the history of Halloween. So if anybody has any good links and articles, if they want to send them to me or us, then send them along. I've done a lot of research on Halloween, but I'm always willing to read some more. And just keep all the brethren in your prayers. We have a lot of brethren that's having financial and physical problems, and I know Carolyn's having surgery, and there's just so many brethren right now that I hear all the time that are having health problems. We just need to pray for each other, and then people that are getting hit down in Mexico by that 200-mile-an-hour hurricane, there's brethren down there, I'm sure, so we just need to pray for these people that they can get through this. So
Okay.
just there's a lot going on. So I'm gonna try and switch over here, and we're gonna say good night.
Have a good Sabbath.
Yep, everybody have a good Sabbath. And of course, when I want to find it, I can't find it.
Remind me, there's one big event, religious event, happened on Halloween. Remind me to tell you all what it is next week.
Okay.
Happened on Halloween. You'll be surprised when you hear it. Because I was when I found out.
You're just going to leave us hanging, aren't you?
Yes. No one will
right.
guess. Nobody will guess it. I guarantee you, nobody will guess it.
My sister was born on Halloween.
Oh, they won't.
I'm having a worse time than usual.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here. And hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you. in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.